Hi, my name is Joe. I'm a physics teacher. I wanted to show off a mechanics experiment that involves a very particular piece of equipment and teach you how to build that equipment from parts. The lab itself comes from OpenSciEd High School Physics Unit 3 on momentum and collisions. The basic idea is this beautiful method of uncovering Newton's second law from 3 student-designed experiments. Huge shout out to Laura Zeller and Michael Novak who came up with all this. All I did was make some modifications to the equipment itself. In the lab, each student group does one of 3 experiments. The dependent variable is the same for each experiment. This cart rolls down a ramp, and then we measure the time it takes to come to a stop on the flat ground at the bottom of the ramp. But the 3 independent variables are different, and they allow us to build Newton's second law from data. Some groups change the friction force stopping the cart. Some change mass by adding pebbles to this bucket. And some change speed by dropping the cart from higher or lower on the ramp. All of these results build into various forms of Newton's second law, which we can apply to all sorts of situations. Physics teachers, in my experience, introduce Newton's second law in all sorts of different ways. I like this way because these experiments and this analysis are very intuitive to students, and most importantly, they're actually motivated by questions that students have at this point in the collisions unit. So the work doesn't just come out of the blue, it makes sense why we are doing this work at this time. Students have questions about why cars stop in a certain amount of time, so our experiment is about that. You'll need some tools to build these force carts: a drill with a 1/16 and 3/16 inch bit, a wide and a narrow Phillips screwdriver, wood glue, and some hot glue. These nut drivers, 1/2 inch and 5/16 inch, are convenient, but you can finish the build without them. Then these washers and the string and this flooring are needed to actually do the experiment, along with some other stuff that you might have around your classroom already. Here are the materials needed for 1 cart. There's a shopping list in the comments for stuff you'd need to make 5 carts for around $180. Cut this plywood to 4 inch by 4 inch and these 1/2 inch sticks to 8 inch and 1 inch long. I used the foot-long mending plate itself to space out these 4 3/16 inch holes. Or you could mark them with a pencil if you like being careful, but you need these 4 holes plus one at the very front that we use to tie a string that we drag the cart by to measure friction. Spacing on those other 4 holes, though, needs to be perfect so that we can bolt everything to this mending plate. Same with one of the 4x4 plywood pieces and the plastic tub, because both of those get bolted to the metal cart through 2 holes. The plywood with just 1 hole is less precise. Just try to center it about 1 inch from one side. Then once you've drilled all these 3/16 inch holes, you're gonna switch to the 1/16 inch bit to drill pilot holes for this hinge. I was fine using the hinge itself as a guide for my holes, but again, a pencil would be safer. These hinges do take some abuse, so don't drill out too much or the screws won't get purchased in that wood. Then we're going to use wood glue, not hot glue, to attach these 2 wooden pieces together. I always put wood glue on both pieces and then spread it around to get a thin layer. When you push them together, make sure to leave a little overhang on one piece and then wipe off any extra glue to give the hinge plenty of space to swing. You're going to need to clamp these pieces together somehow. You could use a rubber band if you could get it tight enough, or a big binder clip will work. If you have a proper clamp, you could stack a few assembled pieces and leave them all clamped together as you build the rest of the car body. We're going to attach these 5/16 inch coupling nuts to the body, but we need to use some hot glue to help them stay in place. I like attaching one side of this metal strap with a 1/2 inch bolt and then putting some hot glue underneath the coupling so that when I tighten the other side, it nestles down in there and sticks tight. I can even do some steering to make it straight in the time it takes for the glue to cool down and then tighten it down. This is where the
Nut drivers are handy because otherwise you have to hold this nut with a wrench or pliers, and the nut driver is a lot more fun. When you assemble the wheels and the axles, you'll need to take some time to get this nylon lock nut snug up against the pulley wheel. And this does require 2 wrenches or a bigger nut driver and a wrench. The point of the lock nut is to not rotate easily so that things stay snug, and that makes it pretty hard to wrench down. So when you get to the end, you want to tighten it and then loosen it the tiniest bit to give the bearing space to turn. The second nut doesn't have to be a lock nut, but it could be. It's just there as a spacer. And then you're going to make 4 of these wheels that you'll end up screwing into the coupling nuts. If you do notice the axle is coming loose, you can hit it again with some hot glue if it's needed. Now we're going to build the rest of the body. So we want to line up those 4 holes in the 8-inch long wooden piece with the same holes in the mending plate. And then use a 3-inch bolt with a washer and a lock washer. The lock washer is different from a lock nut. It goes between a washer and a nut, but the idea is the same. We just want to tighten down on this connection so it doesn't accidentally come loose over time. This front axle can actually get a little tricky. I bolt in the front side first using a 1.5-inch bolt because 2 of these bolts in the body do double duty holding on the plastic container. You'll need to position them, put the plastic container on, and then put the plywood on, and then put the nut on each bolt. The nut driver is especially helpful here because you don't have to try to wiggle around down there with pliers, but you can do it with pliers. Then we tighten these wheels into the coupling nut axle, but the axle isn't glued in yet because this front axle matters a whole lot for whether the cart goes straight. So I put some hot glue on it first to get some goop under there, and then I'll steer it to be about the right position before screwing in this bolt to tighten this strap. But before that glue cools, we want to actually test the cart on a ramp or even just a flat surface because we want to make sure that this thing goes straight. So you kind of wiggle the front axle back and forth. And by the way, this is a great time to make sure that those wheels are clamped down tightly because otherwise they'll come off. But eventually you'll get a cart that goes straight pretty consistently. And at that point, you're going to want to put more glue on the axle. Now, you're not gluing the axle to the body. You're basically surrounding the axle with enough glue that it doesn't wobble so much and it stays in the same spot as it gets used over and over and over again. So our last few steps are to get this back brake mounted to the hinge. And again, these hinges take a lot of wear, so we want to make sure that they are installed carefully, and the hinge needs to be free enough to rotate up and down so that as much friction as possible is exerted on those wheels when braking. I left the screws on the body itself slightly looser so that the plywood pad touches both wheels at the same time when braking, especially when there are some washers on top of it. So to hold those braking washers, we use another 3-inch bolt and we tighten it with another washer and another lock washer. That way we can change the braking friction without changing the total mass of the cart by moving washers back and forth from one post to the other. The last thing that I love about this design is this little brace that goes into the brake as the car is rolling down the ramp. So when the car reaches the end of the string, it pulls out this brace and engages the brake so the car starts slowing down. By the way, you might notice that swapping these washers technically changes the center of mass, which would change the speed. The original design takes this into account, but I decided that it's just not worth it given the huge uncertainties in the experiment. Better to have a sturdy cart than slightly better data. The last detail here is about measuring speed for the speed group. If you have a photogate system, you can use that. Just mount a flag onto the top of the cart. Or if you have a Vernier or Pasco smart cart, you can use magnets on the end of that smart cart to stick to a metal plate that you screw onto the front of this force cart. That metal plate may need to be mounted lower or higher depending on the type of smart cart you have. Leave comments on this video or at the WordPress blog linked below if you've got something to say about this or anything else. I would love to hear from you. Thanks for watching.